Okay, in this video we're going to talk about replacing the rear main seal on an AMC 304, 360, 401. Should be the same for all of them. You'll see here that I have a new gasket for the oil pan. That has to be replaced obviously because you have to take the oil pan off. Here's the new rear main. It's a two-piece rear main, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Show you the part number here. And you're going to need some RTV. I went with this one. It says Max Flex and it's gold. So yeah, why not? All right, let's take a peek. I've already gotten started. I've taken the oil pan off. So one of the things I'm gonna need to do is clean up around the edges of this oil pan, get that surface nice and smooth. And you'll see the remnants of the old gasket here on the floor. And again, the oil pan gasket is 4 pieces. So one piece for each side, and again, one piece for the front and back that are rubber. You're gonna need RTV to seal 4 corners up. We'll show you that in a little bit. Now let's go take a look at the engine. So you can see the bottom half of my engine. One good thing about this project is you get to see what the bottom half of your engine looks like, and mine looks pretty good. So in taking this apart, if you have factory motor mounts, which I don't, I'm using the more off-road heavy-duty style motor mounts, I didn't have to do anything with the motor mounts. If you're using factory, this is for Jeep CJ7, by the way, that this engine is in. If you're using a factory Jeep CJ7 motor mount, you will have to loosen them and disconnect those in order to move this. I've done that on another Jeep where that's what I had to do. This Jeep I didn't, because these mounts position differently, so I just didn't have to do that. I did have to remove this crossbar. You will have to remove that. You will have to remove your starter. So you'll see my starter has been removed, and you'll have to loosen this transmission bell housing check plate. You'll have to remove that as well. Now to replace the rear main, we're going to have to disconnect this bearing cap here in the back. So those 2 bolts are going to come out. We're going to pull out our 2-piece rear main. You're going to use a pick to push that rear main, the top half over, and grab it with a piece of pliers. So we'll do that and show you what that looks like when it's done. When you go to tighten this back up, you're going to tighten these 2 bolts to 80 foot-pounds, and we'll go from there. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and show you what it looks like. A couple of quick things to note. First, the bolts that are going to come out are about this long, and they're 13/16 socket, okay? Now, I would make sure that you put the same bolts back in the same slot, so separate them, 1 on each side. Now, having this out, I'll show you the bearing cap in a minute, but one of the things you'll notice here, if you take a look at where the bearing cap was, you can see some oil on the other side, and you can see it running down the crank a little bit. So that almost tells me for sure that this is where my leak was happening, okay? And the whole reason I'm replacing this rear main, obviously, is because it was leaking. So now let's go take a peek at that bearing cap. Okay, and here's the bearing cap. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here is you'll see a little bit of oil running up over where the seal is on the other side of the seal. And this part here is the back part. So this is the part that would be facing the back of the engine, the back of the crank. You'll see how some oil has pulled up and is slipping over. So as you can see, it was definitely leaking through the rear main seal. You'll also notice that there's no RTV here, and there should be RTV here. So whoever did this seal last did not put the proper RTV, and that is most likely why the seal is failing on me and leaking. One thing I just want to mention when you're pulling the bearing cap bolts out, they were in there torqued pretty good. I had to use my impact wrench just to loosen them up a little bit, and then I took them out by hand the rest of the way. So now what I'm going to do is get the new seal in and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I have a pick and some pliers with me. Now what you'll see here is if you look right there, that's the top half of the seal on the driver's side. What I'm going to do with this pick is I'm going to push on that, and then I'm going to come over to the passenger side, and I'm going to pull on the seal here as it comes down. I'm going to do that off camera. But again, as a reinforcement, you'll see there's no remnants of any RTV here. So that's probably a really good reason as to why this was leaking in the first place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll see the results. Okay, so I had a little trouble getting out with the pick. What I ended up using was this punch right here. And what I did was I put the punch in the hole up here, and I used a little hammer, and I just tapped it. And by doing that, that very nicely pushed the seal down here, where now I'm going to grab it and should be able to pull it right out with a pair of pliers. So just again, a pick wasn't good enough. It was just pointing into it. It wasn't actually pushing it. So I had to use a punch with a flat face on it and a little hammer just to tap it gently, and that moved it over. Okay, and to take the bottom part of the seal out of the bearing cap, we used a similar process. This was in here. I took the punch, put it on top, banged on it a little bit, and that loosened it up. Just be careful not to actually hit the the bearing retainer itself. I want to point out is the seal obviously has two sides to it. And one of the things you'll notice is one side of it has more of an angle to it. The side that's more angled is the side that goes towards the back of the vehicle. This side here is the side that goes towards the front of the vehicle, okay? So the side, so if we flip these over, you'll see that little angle there. That's the side that's pointing to the rear of the vehicle when you're replacing these seals. The thing I recommend you do is check the old part with the new part. Do they match up? And after inspecting these, they look pretty much the same. Put them over each other. They look to be the same size. Okay, this way you don't end up putting something in and then realizing later that it's the wrong size or something along those lines. Okay, top seal is in. Not gonna lie to you, it was a pain in the butt. I had to pull it in and out a bunch of times. What you really need to do is a little bit of a technique to this. As you're pushing the seal in and trying to push it up, you have to kind of put your finger on it so that it doesn't rub up against the side of the block there, because what happens is the seal starts to get chewed up if you do. So you really have to push up against the crank as you're pushing the seal up into where it's going. Otherwise, the seal starts to tear a little bit. So just be really careful with it. Okay, bearing cap is back on. It only goes one way. Went on easily. And I threaded both of these hand tight. So now I'm gonna get the torque wrench out. And what I'm gonna do is just a little bit at each time. Little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. Just a little bit, right? So that this drives up exactly at the same time, or as close as we can get it, so that this makes a really, really tight seal. So I'm gonna drive this a little bit at each time until we get to 80 pounds on both sides. And then from there, we're gonna go on to the oil pan. Okay, now that the bearing cap's torqued to 80 foot-pounds, let's take a look at the oil pan. Here we wanna go and clean off all this residue on top, make sure there's no junk in the pan here. And then we're gonna go up to the block, and we're gonna look at the block all around to the edges here, clean off all that oil, and just make sure it's a nice and clean block. One thing I want to point out now is that the 4 screws in the front, so first 2 on each side here, these are going to be using a half inch socket, okay? And along with the very last 2 screws in the back, those are a half inch, okay? Along the side here, these are going to be 7/16, all right? There's quite a few, so we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, I'm going to go clean up these areas, put the gasket on, and go from there. Okay, the pan is clean up. Just gonna put a little brake clean on these corners here, just so that when I go to apply the RTV, it sticks good. Looking up here at the block, you'll see I've got the seals in place here, and I've got these corners joined up with some RTV, okay, on the block. And the way I got these seals to stick, the 2 cork ones, was I just used a little bit of this adhesive spray, just a tad, just to get it there. I wouldn't put a lot of it on there, just enough. So I'm at the point now where I'm ready to put the pan up and start getting some screws in. And now all the bolts for the oil pan are back on, and it's fully installed. Also installed a new oil filter. Just need to put the starter back in. We'll be good to fill it up and go. Now I'm gonna wait 24 hours because that's what the RTV says before I start filling it with oil and crank it. Now they have RTV that'll dry in an hour, and I've actually seen some recently that'll dry in a minute, but I just went for the old-fashioned stuff that's 24 hours. So I'm gonna give it 24 hours, fill it up with oil, and see how it goes. Okay, now let's fire it up. Let it run for a few minutes and see how it turns out. Building good oil pressure. Now let's see what it looks like underneath. Okay, and here we are underneath. Now, previously before, the rear main was leaking right over here, right between the check plate and the bell housing. Seems to be pretty dry up there now. Looking at the whole oil pan, it looks pretty good all the way around. I'd say mission accomplished. There you have it, a rear main seal and an oil pan gasket replaced on an AMC 360, which would be the same for an AMC 304 or 401. Thanks for watching. Oh, and remember, before you start the engine, make sure you fill it with oil.